In 6 words or less, tell me what about being a woman makes you the most proud?
Camaraderie with other women.
Having a growth mindset and pushing boundaries.
I think for me, just the empathy and real friendship and honesty.
Okay, so I'm going to say look to the lioness. She both hunts and nurtures.
Did you look that up on Google?
I did not.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for tuning in to this very special panel discussion for Women's History Month. I'm Rebecca Campbell, Director of Global Digital Experience. Every year, International Women's Day has a theme, and this year it's Choose to Challenge. When I first learned about this theme, it really resonated with me, and I immediately began to think of ways that I could challenge myself. I lost my mom when I was young, and while my mom was absolutely a role model of strength and courage to me, I really didn't have other female role models until I entered the workforce. So I challenged myself, not only on International Women's Day, but throughout March, to somehow celebrate all women by shining a light on some of the extraordinary female executives at Oracle. I have been so fortunate in my career to work alongside the most intelligent, creative, ambitious, and kind women, one of whom is on this panel today. So without further ado, it is my true honor to introduce our 4 panelists. Ashley Hart is Senior Vice President for Oracle Cloud. Emily Hutt is Senior Vice President for Global HCM Marketing. Lisa Joy Rosner is Senior Vice President of Brand and Content Marketing. And last but not least, the Senior Vice President I have the good fortune to work with each day, Ricardo Rodatis, Senior Vice President of Analyst Relations. Welcome, ladies, and thank you for your time today. Let's get right into it. I mentioned that this year's theme for International Women's Day is Choose to Challenge. That phrase can be interpreted in many different ways, and I would love to start by asking each of you what it means to you personally. Ashley, do you want to start? What does Choose to Challenge mean to you?
Sure. Thanks, Rebecca. Choose to Challenge to me was challenging the perception of diversity and inclusion in tech, honestly, especially in bigger companies. Most of my career, I actually spent as an entrepreneur in the tech industry, started out in Silicon Valley in the mid-90s, and then actually most of it staying with small startups or my own company or consulting for fast growth technology companies. So it wasn't until the last few years that I get involved in actually being in a big enterprise company. And when I did, I didn't realize the lack of diversity and inclusion, especially with women, at being at not necessarily in the companies, but at higher levels at executive positions. So my Choose to Challenge was to challenge the perception that even though women are working in technology, they're not at the top of the technology ladder. And what could I do in order to help move that, change that, do something that was impactful while I was a CMO and helping other women to getting there?
That is so wonderful. I love that's such a, I think, unique perspective that you kind of came in and those around you were aware, but you weren't necessarily aware until you sort of got right in the middle of it, and then you did something to challenge that. I think that's fantastic. Lisa Joy, what about you? What does this challenge mean to you?
So it means a lot of things, but I'm going to take us back even before the workplace, because there's another piece of diversity that I want to talk about, and that is choosing to challenge a one-size-fits-all approach to learning and education, and considering how we approach neurodiversity, not just in the schools, but also in the workplace. So I have 4 children, and 2 of them learn differently. One has dyslexia and dysgraphia, which is trouble writing, and one has dyslexia and dyscalculia, which is basically dyslexia from math. And we have a one size fits all approach in the education system right now, which just thinks either you fit in the box or you don't. And believe it or not, this is a really interesting stat. 40% of self-made millionaires have some form of neurodiversity. They think differently, they learn differently, they need to be taught differently. So when you talk about choosing to challenge, I challenged the school's curriculum. When I understood the learning challenges that my children have, I went all the way up to the board level of our school to change the way the teachers are taught so they can identify these learning differences and teach the children the way they learn. And one of the things, my big goal, one of my bucket lists here for us at Oracle and other organizations, Richard Branson, who is an example of a self-made millionaire who has learning differences, has started a foundation called Made by Dyslexia, which, among many things, first they put together training programs for teachers, and now they're doing training programs in the workplace. Because if you look around, particularly the type of individuals we have here at Oracle, I would bet you that many of our most brilliant people are on some kind of neurodiverse learning spectrum. And that means that we have to communicate with them the way they need to be communicated so that as leaders, we can help them contribute the most effective way possible. And so to me, choose to challenge is every form of diversity. Obviously, I'm a woman in business and I have challenged every step of the way throughout my career how women grow and express themselves and advocate for themselves in business. But I also am very focused on choosing to challenge the way we meet people where they are and the way they learn and the way they communicate at school and further on into the workplace.
Ricardo, what about you? Choose to challenge. What comes to mind for you?
Very, very difficult to follow these two very thoughtful approaches of Lisa and Ashley, because it's very interesting how we all hear the same sentence, choose to challenge. We get the same message and we all have different interpretations of it, right? Based on our past experiences and based on our current situations and circumstances. So for me, being German, hearing this motto, I immediately went down kind of the functional route, and I took it very literal. For me, that was more a practical question. And like, how did I choose to challenge myself in my function at Oracle? And one specific situation came to mind. I remember 2 years ago, it was a very cold January in New York. So, you know, when you have these little epiphanies, you always remember the circumstances, like the temperature, the song, the location. I remember the hotel bar I sat at, and I was in the middle of a very prestigious leadership training that Oracle provided me, and they said, hey, challenge yourself, come up with a project that will challenge the way you work. And like, okay, I'm head of analyst relations, how can I challenge myself and my team around me? So with all my power and all of my head and heart, I worked on challenging the AR function, looking at a new strategy, looking at my team's organization, the charter, very passionately looking at the people and what they bring and the new people I needed to kind of change AR from its foundation up. And I started to build the most cutting edge AR team with the people I had, and also hiring new people just to look at shaping a new digital future within AR. And I first, when I hear like Ashley and Lisa, like these are so personal stories to them, yet to me, I take AR very personal. And since then, just being a little bit competitive, right? We have won the most prestigious AR of the Year award for 2 years in a row. So I think my challenge to challenge myself, my team, and the function has really shown some good fruit.
I would agree. And being on your team, I can say that you do challenge each of us every day in the best way to be our best selves. And you absolutely lead by example. So thank you for that, Ricarda. Emily, you are up next. What does choose to challenge mean to you?
Yeah, just listening to the conversation from Ashley, Lisa, Ricarda, and Rebecca, you as well, reminds me why I love working at Oracle. You guys inspire me every day, so thank you for that. There are so many things to challenge in our personal lives and in the workplace, but one thing I decided that I'm going to challenge this year is the narrative. And when I say the narrative, is really the narrative people have about you, the narrative you have about other people, and the narrative that you have about yourself. Because I think the narrative is the single most important thing that you can use to change your career trajectory and also help others realize their potential and their professional and personal aspirations. When I talk about a narrative is a story you craft about yourself. It's a story that connects different events and experience in your life that help people make sense of what you've learned from that experience and where you want to go. I believe a narrative can help you define who you are and who you want to be. And a narrative can either limit you or help you expand your vision for what you can accomplish. In my professional experience, I realized that people often have a narrative about you, even though they don't verbalize it. And that narrative is typically based on their own experience. And sometimes that includes unconscious bias. So for example, for me personally, I've encountered so many people who tell me that I'm too opinionated, I'm too sometimes aggressive because they expect a woman to be maybe sometimes a little bit demure and submissive. And I grew up in Asia. That's sort of the expectation people have for me as well. And it's really up to me to not live according to other people's expectation and have the courage to challenge that narrative and define my own path. I think when Lisa talked about the neurodiversity, it's the same thing. You can turn a seeming disadvantage into an advantage, right? Like exactly like Lisa said, so many successful people have neurodiversity, and that could be an advantage. So it's up to us to interpret our events differently. The other thing I've learned is, even though I'm very conscious of the importance of narrative, sometimes I have unconscious bias about other people as well. So for example, when I was growing up, everybody around me, all the women around me were working. I did not encounter a single woman who wasn't working. So I just kind of took that for granted. When I came to the US, I noticed a lot of women they chose to be working at home moms when they have children. And I just for the life of me, I couldn't understand, how could you do that? How could you give up a professional experience? And over time, I came to appreciate why people would make that choice. And I've come to a point where I make an effort to support people integrate their needs at home and their professional experience, because I do think it's so important to spend time with your children and prioritize your family. And as leaders, we have the opportunity to support women in integrating their work and professional experience. Lastly, I would say the most important thing you can do for your career is to create a narrative about yourself. This is the best way to uplift yourself, and to do that, to really think through what narrative you have about your future self. I've heard so many of my employees impose limitation on themselves. Some people may say, well, I'm the behind the scenes kind of operator. I can never lead from the front. That's not true. Think deeply about whether that's really true or not, or that's just a convenient excuse you have for yourself not to step to the front. Because once you set that goal, you can do it. Other people would say, I'm really good at processes and operationalizing things, but I'm not really good at strategy. Again, I beg to differ. I think The best strategists come from people who are really good at operations and details. So the bottom line is I choose to challenge the narrative we have about each other and we have about ourselves.
So Emily, I think that your badassery is amazing.
Me too.
There's
I
a
second
real
that.
difference between confidence and arrogance. And one of the things that happens to women is that if we're confident, we just know who we are and we just do our job, right? With confidence, sometimes it can get misconstrued as arrogance. Whereas, and I'm going to say it, where a man will do the exact same thing and people just think, oh, yeah, that's normal. But I think that the way you conduct yourself is just phenomenal.
I 100% agree with Lisa. I think, Emily, matter of fact, all you women are amazing leaders, and not that you happen to be women, but you're just amazing leaders, the way that you actually conduct yourselves, the way that you persevere, and the way that you actually, in many ways, this steal from Emily, that narrative that we've all created at Oracle and how we've conducted ourselves. And what I do think is really interesting is Emily's choose the challenge of challenging narratives. It actually is a thread between all four of us. Even though we've each said something that's different personally, they actually all have to do about narrative. You know, of we just happen to choose something that happened to us of what we were doing for choose the challenge, but Emily's actually applies to all four of us in the what we actually kind of did as descriptions. If you think about that, especially as women, our narrative as women is sometimes unfortunately put onto us by the narrative of how we should conduct ourselves within this, even and especially within in this industry of technology.
So I have something I want to add. We've talked about challenging the status quo. I also want to talk about challenging stereotypes. So my family is a flip family. I work and my husband stays home. And he has been the one we obviously raise the children together, but he is the one who is at home full time. 4 kids require that, actually. And I have 3 girls and 1 boy. The boy is first. And it wasn't until the kids were pretty old that they just thought our home was normal. And there was one time when I met my husband, I had over 1 million frequent flyer miles. And so when I was nursing a baby, I would take the whole family on all my business trips. And so I had a baby, I think the 3rd one. And we were in New York and my daughter said, I want to go see grandpa. And I said to her, oh, well, I got to check what time he's done with work. And she just looked at me and said, men work? I had no idea that men work. Talk about choose to challenge, right? So in this household, boys and girls just think that anyone can do and be anything. And that's on both sides of it, because sometimes my husband gets flack. Men have been very unkind to him. And he's so confident and so comfortable with what he's doing that he just blows off any nasty comments. But that choosing to challenge just the stereotypes of who belongs where, doing what role, it's been a really important part of how we're raising our family and how we present, in the community and the workforce everywhere we go. It's pretty radical thinking.
I was going to say, I mean, you just gave a perfect example of the importance of a narrative, right? Oftentimes we tell ourselves these stories in our head and we take it as the God-given truth. But oftentimes, if you simply ask yourself, can the opposite be true? The answer is often yes, or no, depending on the situation. But I just think if you create a narrative about your future self and you truly internalize that, nobody can take that away from you, and that's the best path for you to achieve all the aspirations and ambitions you have.
You know, it's too bad though that we have to think of it as being opposite. My mom was an incredibly strong woman, and I have 3 older brothers. I never knew, they never taught me, and my father never even thought of me as not ever having the same benefits or or kind of pathways. If anything, I'm actually the first one in my family to graduate college.
Mhm.
My brothers taught me how to go and change a tire because two of my brothers are mechanics. And so they didn't even think, oh, she's a girl. They taught me as soon as they got me a car, because it was actually my brother that bought me my first car. He's like, and it was an old car, but they didn't want it to break down. And so they taught me how to repair a car, how to change a tire, how to go change my own oil. Even though they were mechanics, I was like, can't you do this for me? And they're like, no, you need to learn that in case something happens, you should be able to do this. And why should we do it for you? So I never had a thought of that I was ever less than or opposite to a man. It was just more of the opportunity. I think I was just raised in a family that I was never thought of being any different than who I was, except the younger sister that I tried to take advantage of. And they're like, no, you didn't do that.
Well, I wanted to talk to Rebecca for a second, because her opening really got me in the heart, which is to choose to challenge adversity. So my mother died when I was very young as well, probably younger, because it sounds like you knew your mother and I didn't know mine. And apparently I'm very similar to her, but I don't really know. But it's about choosing to challenge adversity. And that's a really important one. When you are faced with something that's really, really difficult, you have two choices. You can break down or you can break records, right? And when I listened to your opening, Rebecca, it sounds like you just took that adversity and it gave you strength so that you can approach it with the break records kind of mentality. And I think that's another really important thing to challenge. And in fact, I mean, look at our zeitgeist, look at where we are right now. I mean, we could all be breaking down, but no, we're sitting in our house and we're still making things happen every single day. And so I'd love to hear from Rebecca a little bit about how you chose to challenge adversity and become the stunning professional that you are today.
Oh, thank you so much for that, Lisa. You're right. I did recognize immediately that I had a choice. Like you said, I could either sort of let my mom's passing really cripple me, or I could take what I'd learned from her in the short time that I, was blessed to have her as my mother, and push forward and push ahead and make her proud, try to be the daughter that I know she would want me to be. And so I would say, I don't know that I came to that immediately, but I think as I've gotten older, and like I said, have had the really good fortune to have incredible female role models in my career, it became just sort of a laser focus of mine to use that as my strength and use that adversity as sort of my superpower, and let me be a more compassionate person because of it. Be able to empathize with people and to realize that everybody's going through something, right? And I had this tremendous loss, but I didn't let it hold me back. I used it to propel me forward. I always sort of had this mantra in my head of, I can either be paralyzed or I can be propelled. And so I chose to propel myself forward and continue to try to do that every day.
And your stories and the narrative, Emily, you point out, are so heartwarming, I need to say. And these stories are so inspiring. And what I learned at one point is that stories give us wings, right? And they take us places. And I was not aware of that for a long time. And telling a good story is just so hard. It is something we can learn. Some people do it naturally, I feel, but I had to learn it kind of, not the hard way, but almost in school. I went to this very prestigious business school in Europe, Ashridge, and they had a methodology called the appreciative inquiry. And it was always hard to even say this, the appreciative inquiry methodology. And it's about being respectful and curious, and asking good questions and telling good stories. And this is what I hear throughout. This is what we just heard, is like the narrative that Emily brought up is almost kind of like the red thread that connects us all, where it's with people, we need to go down this appreciative way and understanding where they come from and being really curious about where they are at and learning from them and with them, and treating the connections with people as an opportunity to understand, just challenging yourself by challenging others in a positive way. So it really all resonates what you guys are telling.
Exactly, Ricardo. I wasn't educated in the US. So I grew up in China, where storytelling was not a thing. Nobody, I mean, not storytelling from the literature sense, but nobody at school ever asked me, what do I want to do when I grow up? It's all, when you grow up, if you become an engineer, doctor, or lawyer, then you're successful. So that's your path. And this muscle of creating your own vision, creating your own narrative, storytelling, reshaping your life experiences to be something else was an art I only was exposed to after I came to the US. So I had to study really hard because I didn't know what people meant by that. And I did a lot of reading around how to create your own narrative and how to tell your life story. And what I realized is when you tell your own story, even when it's not reality, for your brain and for your body, is as real as if it's reality. So the best way for you to prepare yourself into the future is to create a vision that's so real that you feel like it's already happened. And that's why I think narrative is so important. And the best way we help our employees, our colleagues, everyone around us, is to challenge them to think differently about what their future can hold, because we can do whatever we want to do if we really put our heart and soul into this new narrative and making that happen.
I love that, and I completely agree. Thank you, Emily. So let's switch gears for a minute. I would love to hear from each of you about what obstacles you faced in the workplace. Obviously, you are incredibly successful women, SVPs, just incredible executives at Oracle, but I'm sure, right, that there have been some obstacles that you have faced, maybe still face today. So I'd love to hear from each of you about how you tackled those, and maybe some advice you would give someone who may also be facing some challenges or some obstacles in their day-to-day work environment.
Sure. I guess I'm I'm being polite and waiting for my colleagues to.
Don't be shy.
For obstacles, I think because I started my career on Wall Street, I literally was the only immigrant woman, multiracial, bisexual person at the time on Wall Street. And so nobody else looked like me. And I never really thought of it as obstacles, maybe because the way I was raised, like Em and Ricardo, I'm not from the United States. I'm actually from Jamaica. I came here when I was young with my brothers and was taught in a very Jamaican way of equity, pure equity so I never really thought until others had actually said something to me of, oh, it must be hard being like you. And I didn't know what that, I've actually had people say that to me when I started on Wall Street. I didn't know what they were talking about, to be quite honest. And I think I learned, it's not until later, because I think I had the foundation of my family, of the way I was raised. And in some ways, like what Emily has said, you create this narrative. I had always a narrative of, and because my family helped me never to think of anything as an obstacle as a woman, or all these other minorities that I happen to have going on with me, I never thought of myself even as a minority. But obviously, as I grew, as in terms of becoming an executive, I realized that not everybody had the same kind of similar foundation. And a little bit to what Lisa Joy was talking about, of that, the kind of challenges that you have to actually break through, or the adversity that you've been through, Rebecca, that I felt it was part of my job, that to actually help younger women or anybody who was different to actually see of how you could actually challenge that status quo. And how do you not think of it as an obstacle, but you think of it as, how do you just actually look at the different way? What is the different perspective? Instead of thinking, oh, I can't do this. How can I do this? Never to think in the negative. So for me, for obstacles, I never really thought of there ever was an obstacle. I just thought, okay, I'm going to figure out how I'm going to get around this, or go through the door, or if I have to swim under that door, whatever I have to do to get through it, that's what I'm going to do. So that what I would recommend to anybody, and I still do, I mentor a lot of people, is to never think that you can't do something. Always remember that you can, but just figure out, how do you do it? Sometimes you have to wing it. You fake it till you make it. And I'm sorry, we don't talk about that enough, but it is true. I mean, we all have gone to leadership positions because we did something that was different. We didn't do something that was quiet. And so to me, always challenge that status quo, and look to your friends. If you don't have friends or colleagues that you can talk to internally, talk to the outside, because they will be your best support.
And Ashley, that resonates so much with me, where you just said, yeah, you become a leader, right? You start leading teams and individuals and humans, and often it doesn't come kind of with a theoretical course on how to lead. You can read books and you can like talk to other people. Yet it's really scary, right? When all of a sudden people look at you, I'm like, what's your opinion? How would you tackle this? Where do you want us to go? And I always realized that, and it was not an 80-20 rule, it was more maybe like a 60-40 rule, where 60% always said, right, Ricarda, great idea, I'll follow you over the rainbow or wherever. And then there was this other portion of 40% that were hesitant or sometimes even negative towards me. And it took me a very long time to understand how to motivate people. And it was one specific kind of training methodology, which we applied more in the engineering space, the design thinking, where I'm like, oh my God, that's it. It's not about me standing on stage and presenting and having all the answers and about just leading by myself, but the design thinking methodology around being empathetic and understanding who you work with, your user, your customer, whatever, the other human being. And then kind of the value system around co-creating and co-designing and failing fast, failing often. I'm like, wow, I can fail, and I can fail with others. So the heterogeneous teams, right? Where it's not just like somebody like me, but others that are so different to me. And it took a long time also for me, Ashley, to understand, yeah, you're not alone. You have other people around you that you can collaborate with. You do not need to bring the solution. You need to help others together with you to find the solution, right? When I realized it was not all about me, it was really helpful, but also eye-opening, and enabling others finding their voice is so key.
Ricarda, you're so right, because I think the key thing that you said is the empathy and the failure. I think my first startup that I ever did, brought me to Silicon Valley. Friends of mine and I started a company in Palo Alto, and we failed. We failed at it, but it was the best thing that taught me, because it taught me empathy also. I think sometimes you can become so arrogant, and also when you're so young, it's not until we get older that we realize we need each other in order to be successful. We need to have not just our colleagues and our friends, but to be able to help to be good leaders, to drive a team, you have to be empathetic to understanding their needs, exactly like what you said. So I'm 100% agree.
Yeah, I resonate so much with everything you're saying. I think the biggest lessons I also learned from leadership is just like Ashley, I kind of grew up being taught that women and men are the same. I've never realized there's a difference, and I did everything. I never appreciated there's a distinction between men and women. So I never had a problem kind of leading from the front. But what I realized along the way is leadership requires that you run all the way to the front, hold a big flag on a mountain and say, we're going here. But then you have to come back to the team and kind of hold their hands along the way and push them, nudge them. And if they go off track, you convince them to come back. But everyone needs to feel that you are with them on the journey along the way, and you're as invested in the success as the team. And ideally, when they finally climb to the top of the mountain, they say, we did it. They don't say, you know, my leader made me do it. And that's the sign of leadership. So that's one lesson I really learned along the way. The other thing is, and I always tell this to aspiring young women or anybody who wants to move up in their career, is the skills that require you to move up at different stages of your career change. And you really need to have a beginner's mind and reimagine your skill sets when you embrace new responsibilities. So for example, when I was an individual contributor, I think my skill set is I can anticipate problems. I'm a problem solver. I would run to my manager and say, oh my God, the world is coming to an end and we have these problems and we need to solve. So all my managers loved me because I could solve problems before they even occur. Now, when I started managing people, telling people the world is going to come to an end is not helpful. People are looking for me to inspire their confidence. And I need to project this sense of confidence before things occur. So I had to build this muscle of setting the vision and communicating in a more positive and inspiring way. But every step along the way, you have to rethink, okay, I have a new responsibility. And what skills do I need to acquire for me to be a more effective leader at a different scale?
Mm-hmm.
So I have a fun story that I want to share. So when early in my career, I really felt that I was raised on the East Coast, raised in New York, Ashley, not far from where you were working. And I felt that as a female in business, I had to have this like imaginary wall around me. Like, you know, I felt that I had to be like extra serious and all professional all the time. And I had this very humbling thing happen to me, and it really taught me. That's why I'm as forthcoming as I am now, but I was very different when I was younger. So I was at my first startup, like you, Ashley, and I was in New York at this big important conference. And this will show you how long ago it was. There was an event at Tavern on the Green, and there was a very, very senior, polished executive. I actually was almost a little bit afraid of him. I was in awe of him. And I was instructed to go to this conference and get both a customer and a partnership deal with this company. So I mentioned my dad that my daughter wanted to see. Well, he wanted to see me. I said, well, I'll see you tomorrow. Well, what are you doing tonight? I'm at this thing at Tavern on the Green. Okay, so we're at Tavern on the Green. And I walk up to this man, his name was Bob. And I walk up to him, you know, I straighten my suit, walk up to him, give him a really, you know, strong, firm handshake. And say, Bob, it's really nice to meet you. You know, I'm Lisa Joy, I'm from this company, and I'm here to talk to you. And I delivered this really impassioned speech. And what I didn't realize is that my father was standing behind me. And he looked at my dad's a really big guy. He's kind of goofy. His name is Norman. And he just looked at Bob and said, Bob, this is my baby girl. Oh my God. I thought I was going to die. Well, actually, what he had said to me was, I'm not really interested in what you guys do. And I said, I ask that tomorrow at the show, you indulge me with 10 minutes of your time. And if in 10 minutes I can't demonstrate why you should be partnering with us, then, no harm, no foul. And that's when Norman came in and went, that's my baby girl. And I literally, I thought I was going to die. And but I had to be gracious. And I was like, oh, you're here. So fast forward the next day, Bob comes up to me, sticks his Rolex in my face and goes, kid, you get 10 minutes. I think I was 29. You get 10 minutes. Well, he spent an hour and a half with me, and we got the customer deal, we got the partner deal, it advanced the business forward. But at the end of that hour plus, when he said, okay, I see, you're right, your product is incredible and I want to work with you, he looked at me and he said, I have a word of advice for you, kid. I've got 2 daughters. And you need to be nice to Norm, because someday my girls are going to grow up and I'm going to want to see them in action. And don't ever forget that you are a person too. And that he gave me this really important lesson. It was really lovely. And I ended up approaching him to be my mentor. And he was. And I was leading a marketing team. He was the person who helped me land my first public company CMO job, which was replacing him in his role. And he said to the CEO, you want someone, you can't have me, but you need an up and comer. And he put me into my first public company role. And after that, I learned to not have the wall around me and be not just a very focused professional, but also be human. And that lesson stayed with me to this day.
I love that. All 4 of you are absolutely fearless. We have heard some incredible inspirational stories. We are challenging the narrative, diversity, communication, the status quo, and each other. Ricarda, Lisa Joy, Ashley, and Emily, thank you so much for your time today. This was truly a delightful conversation. So happy to have spent this time with you, ladies. Thank you so much.